Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation on all things cannabis, where we talk about U.S. MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. My name is Cy Scott with Headset. I'm joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the High Rise.
And today we have a very special guest with Brady Cobb, cannabis industry advocate and insider, former operator, founder of One Plant in Florida. Brady, it's so great to have you back today.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I think it's going to be a fun discussion. It's quite the storm in DC right now, so I'm excited to get into it.
Exactly. So this is a special episode. We really wanted to better understand what's going on in DC. There is a lot of activity. I think this week the big headline was the introduction of the States Reform Act, introduced by Nancy Mace of South Carolina. And this is kind of, I guess, an interesting development that happened. I guess we first got wind of it last week, and then it actually got introduced this week. And so I guess, what does this mean for the industry? What are the chances? Is this just a signal? Is this going to push things forward? I don't know. How do you think about this, Brady?
So I think you got to put it in a couple of different buckets. The first bucket is this is a bill I can tell you has been worked on for quite some time. It's very much similar to a previous initiative that I actually worked on with Cory Gardner, the States Act. But the States Act, wasn't progressive enough, and Cory Gardner ended up losing his reelection bid. So you got to look at it in the lens of we now have competing legislation. So the Democrats filed their CAOA back in September. It's largely was a ceremonial filing, full legalization bill, kitchen sink approach, incredibly aspirational. I mean, you got to give kudos to the majority leader Schumer to file it and to give cannabis this big of a pulpit. It's really on display. It truly is a tier 1 issue now, and that's largely majority leader Schumer really elevated the issue. But the bill was very much aspirational. It was kind of dead on arrival from a Republican standpoint. While the Democrats have a majority in the Senate, you still got to get 10 Republicans to vote for it. And that bill, structurally and with a lot of the social issues within it, it's just not going to get those 10 Republican votes. So advocates, and big shout out to Weldon Angeles and his crew, as well as Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers. Think about that. Think about those bedfellows for supporting cannabis and Americans for Prosperity. And Nancy Mace, a freshman Republican from the Deep South, who even defied, it looks like, her party's wishes in the state of South Carolina, and sees this as a common sense issue. And you got to remember, the reason the States Act was crafted the way that it was a states' rights bill. And if you think of like a unique Republican, rally cry, it's states' rights. So it does less than Schumer's bill on the social justice, social equity, and it does more on states' rights, but it does have social equity components. And to be quite candid, I think it has realistic ones. You can't order states to release people from prison, even if you deschedule. You can really only touch that federal population at the federal level, which is, I think less than 7% of all people convicted for cannabis crimes are in the federal system. So that's going to be a longer term reform. But what does it do for our markets? You're looking at a 3% tax instead of a 24% tax. You're looking at states being able to regulate things, which, people want to talk about interstate commerce. I think that's 10 to 15 years away. But even if it does come, each state will regulate how it wants cannabis to be used by its citizens or the people that visit the state, just much the same as alcohol. It's the reason the Volstead Act is repealed and Mississippi was still a dry state until the late 60s. So cannabis will follow a similar track. What does it do for us? First and foremost, it elevated the issue at a very critical political time. Let's not forget, I'm sure you watched what happened in the state of Virginia a couple Tuesdays ago. It sent shockwaves to the Democratic Party. They realized, hey, we got to get to work on a few things, cannabis being one of them. So there is the Safe Banking Act teed up that I know I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on SAFE from a market perspective, and Emily, especially you from a market perspective. But it elevates discussion on SAFE now. Schumer has largely been playing this political chess game of, I'm not going to let safe banking pass, even though his own party's passed it 5 times in the House. And even though there's north of, call it 15 Republican votes by my math right now, by my vote count, that would vote for SAFE right now. Now it's part of a must-pass bill. It's literally would be stealing defeat from the jaws of victory to pull it out. And Nancy Mace doing what she did on the eve of all this and on the tail end of those election results very much was a political, not checkmate, but check to say, hey, you better wake up and take a win. So that's how I view it. Emily, what are your thoughts on SAFE? And then I'll kind of walk you through procedurally what this all could mean and how it could unfold over the next couple of
Right.
weeks.
I mean, from a market perspective, SAFE to me is more of a symbol of progress to open up potentially dialogues to people looking at laws a little differently, maybe even institutions looking at this a little differently, even if it doesn't expressly open up capital markets changes. I think a lot of this would be, then it would create a dialogue, and I think that the exchanges would really engage some legal support to look at this for the U.S. Listed companies. And I think the institutions would view this as a potential buy signal, as something that would open it up and make it worth the effort, because it would be progress finally, instead of just constantly seeing this come forward. And based on what I'm also hearing from our political consultants, there's absolutely the support for SAFE. So that, like you said, I think you said it perfectly about grasping defeat from the jaws of victory here. So, I know there are some people who are saying, oh, well, how can you all switch so quickly to support, what Nancy Mace is doing? But I think for the rest of us, I think you're absolutely right. She just lit a fire on this and said, you've got to push this forward, or else we're going to do it. And frankly, I'm just glad to see a politician paying attention to what the constituents really want, which is to legalize and regulate and tax and have infrastructure around cannabis. And so I'll take any politician who's finally listening to the constituents and standing up to say it. I will take that as a win for the industry to move things forward.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's to me, you got to get that. Winning begets
Yes.
winning. I'm a big sports fan. You get it, teams get hot, you start winning. Don't care what the sport is. You win. Things start happening. DC is an aircraft carrier. It doesn't turn on a dime. It's not a speedboat. It's going to take a second, and you got to start getting those wins. The one thing you can't do is go backwards, which is, whether Nancy Mace was a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat, she offered a common sense bill that actually is passable.
Yeah.
Nobody's done that yet. I've not seen anybody do that yet. It's something that has an actual shot of getting to the finish line and garnering enough votes. It's going to take a minute, though. And that's the other thing. I think, maybe there was a big run up and then a bit of a sell off over the last 48 hours. Nancy, there is no silver bullet. It's going to take a second, but her bill is a bill that now Democrats needed to understand that you'll lose this issue if you don't take ownership of it. And taking ownership of it isn't tweeting about it. Taking ownership of it is actually getting something done. And I think Nancy Mace made that very clear to them that, okay, we better get to work. So now the Schumer's taking up the NDAA today. They filed a motion to proceed. I think you could see a floor vote as early as Thursday on the NDAA. I personally don't expect safe banking language to end up in the Senate version. I believe the Senate's just going to have a very clean, tight bill. A few amendments here and there, but nothing, not as substantive of amendments as the House, which is traditional. And then they'll go into the conference process that last week of November, first week of December. And I believe, based on all the intel we have, the House will ask the Senate to recede to their position, which includes safe banking. So whenever you hear about the conference process, they're literally in a room, the conference negotiators, some from the House, some from the Senate, and they do a page flip. And they go through the bill language because there's differences between the two, and they go through all amendments because there are differences between the two. Okay, you get this one. We want Senate come to our position on this one. And then 2 amendments later, the Senate will say, okay, House, you come to ours on this one. It's truly horse trading at the table. And then a final conference report would be prepared, and that's what's sent with all their agreements. And that's what's ultimately sent to Biden for signature. And this is a must-pass bill. It will be signed before they end the year. I believe that is where, Schumer may object on political grounds at the outset in the amendment process in the Senate. That's why I don't know if it'll necessarily be in there. If it is, great. I don't think it will be, but we're good because it's already in the House. I think in that quieter conference process, as part of a broader deal, is where you'll see SAFE be inserted into the NDAA on a permanent basis. For me, the other thing that I'd bring up is from a performance perspective, which I know you're going to be very interested in these days with your ETF, Emily, is the cost of capital comes down almost immediately. And I say that as an operator. Some of the overhead costs that we have to deal with, the ability to obtain credit card processing instead of the PIN debit with the fees that are associated with PIN debit, all of those items will be rather quickly fixed with the passage of SAFE. I'm not saying JP Morgan's going to show up because the international banks have treaty trouble until the broader reforms achieved. But the mid-sized banking association, who we lobby with, they're ready to rock and roll. The smaller banks, they'll be able to actually do it and do it in a cost-effective way. And based on the conversations we've had with some of the U.S. exchanges, our biggest problem as an industry is the plumbing sucks. There's no way for real capital to get into this space. The volume sucks. This puts us in a much closer to uplistings than most people would guess, just based on what we can do in the regulatory process at FinCEN.
I think you just made an excellent point that gets washed away, and it's part of why SAFE really is an issue it creates more disparity between the bigger operators and the smaller operators too, is that the cost of doing business is so extraordinarily high because of the lack of banking access, and it even washes through into underwriters on insurance. So this industry is drastically underinsured and paying way too much for policies that are really not doing a lot of service to our space. So there's, little things like that, you absolutely just hit it on the head. And I think a lot of people don't even know. Ourselves included, we used to pay really crazy fees to have banking relationships because it was considered kind of like the cannabis management fee, because they think it's so much harder to do our KYC AML. But like now that we're just a bigger firm, guess what? Now I have a bank account that bears interest. But I think about anyone who's trying to launch a new fund or any kind of financial services in this industry, they're going to face that issue, let alone a single operator in a single state who's trying to stand up one business. It's the extraordinarily disproportionate to the cost of doing business. So you just hit it on the head, and safe banking would immediately be like a pressure valve releasing on that.
Oh, for sure. And then you also got to look at, from a markets perspective, if anything, the last 2 weeks have shown us that on the news of a Republican-led bill, the market went nuts. And that's because it really is a coiled spring. There is so much interest in this space. There's so many more consumers that are I'm in California right now. I love coming out here and spending time in market because it really gives you a feel for kind of what's coming. I know a lot of my East Coast buddies, including me, thought we'll do it on the East Coast and move it west just to show them. Sorry, the West stuff starts in the West and goes east from a cultural perspective in cannabis. And you go to I was in some MedMen stores in the LA area. The consumer that's in there, it's pretty incredible to watch. It's a lot of grandmas. It's a lot of my wife's demographic. It was just impressive to see because they were engaged consumers talking about a product, knew what they wanted, enthralled with the product in some aspects, and that's not in the East Coast yet, but it's coming. And to just see that was really cool. And I think that's something as a marketplace, as you look at safe banking passing, you're going to get to see more and more people. It's going to unveil a little bit of a cloud over the industry. It's that first win that'll legitimize us. But more importantly, there's a ton of capital that wants to get into this sector that's waiting for the cover fire. And I think safe's that first bit of cover fire.
What do you think? So if you're a betting man,
what? I am. I got quite a few. I'm not betting you because I got quite a few bets laid down right now, and I've been betting quite a bit. So I'm in Gamblers Anonymous when it comes to safe. But continue.
Yeah. So, and I've seen your tweets, but in case anybody who's missed them, like what percentage do you think this gets done in 21 at this point?
I made a call in February that I thought SAFE would be through by Q4. How did I make that call? The call was based on just seeing that we'd probably be at a very right political opportunity towards the end of the year, especially assuming how that first round of elections goes in the year one of a new, year one in November, is that there'd be an opportunity. I didn't think that the Schumer bill would be a first passable draft out of the Senate with get enough Republican votes so that we'd probably be seeing something where there needs to be a win. I didn't know Perlmutter was going to put it in a must-pass bill, so big kudos, and that man is a champion for us, as is Dave Joyce and countless others in the House, but Perlmutter's a man. And I'd put SAFE by the end of the year. I'm incredibly bullish. I'm well past 50%. I'm well past 60%. To me, I made the call, and I've got a lot of bets with a lot of people, and I think you see SAFE pass before the end of the year. I think you then will see and we can talk about this on another podcast maybe too, as we do look into next year, but if I'm telling you what to start to pay attention to next year, it's the politics and the messaging around the upcoming midterms, which are, as November just showed us, is going to be massive. It's going to be very hotly contested. And I think you're going to see Mace's bill is now out there. You've already have the CAO out there as well as the MORE Act out there. So we have three competing pieces of legislation that are ripe for mergers and acquisitions if we were talking in the M&A world. There's 3 bills there that are teed up to be negotiated. So we have language and a framework and co-sponsors across 3 bills. Can the parties cut a deal that mashes and pulls enough pieces out of each to get a workable piece of legislation before the midterm so they can fulfill campaign promises? It's going to get really fun. It's for our industry, by the way. This is all being compressed down into a very nice, tight. I know it's not going to feel short. You know, a year isn't a short period of time, but in cannabis, a year is pretty short. And yeah, to me, as you look at the next, call it 10 and a half to 11 months as we run up towards these primaries, as a political junkie and someone that's been at this for a minute, it's the perfect setup. We've got an opportunity to achieve some really big things over the next 10 months. And there hasn't been, as Tim Seymour says this all the time, this isn't my line, but to be able to have retail investors that are bought into the long-term vision of the space, this is an opportunity to front run the institutional capital.
Yep.
It doesn't happen very often.
It's a really rare set of circumstances, which if you can stomach it, it sets up an amazing opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bald spots now hasn't been. It's getting bigger. I got to do something. That's why I'm wearing a hat. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's sleepless nights. A lot of breathing into paper bags like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. You know, it's like I'm glad that I actually am in the cannabis industry, because if I didn't smoke every day, I'd already had a heart attack with this market.
Wow.
I mean, look at the last fucking week, up whatever, and 11:30 yesterday as I'm flying to LA. Like I checked my computer on the flight and it back down. I'm like, can you land the plane really quick so I can breathe in a bag, please?
Yep.
Can the oxygen mask drop out of the overhead thing real quick? I need it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Volatility is our friend these days. Yeah.
Well, at least there's volume, though. At least there's volume.
Volume. It feels good to see that. Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I was reflecting, because we're coming up on that time, and we'll talk about this too soon. But I was reflecting on my predictions last year, and I was like, we're gonna get safe in 2021, and I was kind of like, oh, don't make me eat those words. But I feel like I might double down on them now. So I'm feeling the bull.
Do you think having safe, if that does come through this year, does that accelerate these other opportunities? Is it because now it's top of mind, this happened, or does it slow things down because, hey, we got to win, and the legislature says, hey, we gave you something, now we can move on?
I think it actually there's 2 sides to this coin. I'm on the debated it with tons of people, both Twitter, as well as my buddies in DC, as well as people that are a lot smarter than me that I turn to kind of help me think through these scenarios. And there's two sides to that coin. First side of the coin is it's the first win. Winning begets winning. It clears safe. A lot of folks in the Democratic Party view safe as kind of an annoyance, not necessarily in that sense, but it's like, we want to deal with broader, bigger reforms, get this thing out of the way. And then that can allow us to focus on crafting legislation and not having the safe thing keep popping up. So in my mind, I view it as a net positive for Democrats, just to clear it. They can get a narrative out of it. Hey, we got something passed. We got the first cannabis bill passed. We're opening up credit markets and lending markets for our social equity applicants through the smaller banks and the mid-sized banks. It's going to start that process. There's wins they can score out of it. For Republicans, there's wins they can score. First cannabis bill, responsible, allows us to tax things, blah, blah, blah. And then I think that clears the issue, and it gives us the springboard to go cut that bigger deal. It is a tier 1 issue. It's not going backwards. It has been elevated. It was tier 2, tier 3 a couple of years ago. It is tier 1 right now. And there's big folks on the Republican side, including the Trump family. I mean, remember, Weldon Angeles was a former Death Row Records rapper who got sentenced to a very long prison sentence and was actually, got a full pardon. I believe Obama got out of prison, and I think Trump actually pardoned and cleared his record. And the Trump family was very integral in that. And I think that just shows you the Koch brothers have now vocally supported it. Jeff Bezos is in the game. Elon Musk is tweeting about it from time to time. This is the top tier issue. The second side of that coin is, it could be seen as a negative. I can certainly see how, okay, now that, the Republicans won't pay attention to it anymore. I just don't see with the vocal support from Republicans. I'll give you a little adage as to why I say that. There's a senator from Mississippi, Deep South senator, who, when asked about SAFE, and we wouldn't normally even ask them, Deep South Republican senators 3 or 4 years ago, about anything related to cannabis, what do you think about SAFE? Hey, I actually think it's something I could get behind, and I think it's something that if it came up, it should pass, because if they're going to legalize cannabis in my state, then you know what? I want it should be banked in my state. That's the Republican mentality right now. It is not a no. Safe used to be no. They now want to take ownership of this issue. So for them, I don't think they're going to back off at all. Whether safe passers or not, I don't think the Republicans, Nancy Mace is not slowing down. She's got a mandate. She wants to see it through. And the further she pushes it, that means Schumer either has to relinquish the issue in an election year, which I think is doubtful, or they got to go hammer down and try to come up with a competing bill that they can use to leverage a negotiated compromise. In either scenario, there's going to be continued pressure. So I think the Mace bill is the one that I think was the piece that we needed. If it was just CAOA and SAFE, Democrats would feel like they were going to lose momentum. Now, not going to lose momentum. They may lose the issue as a result of the Mace bill. They're going to have to keep pressing forward.
And you mentioned Virginia earlier. We talked about this. There's a bit of a headline around, the switchover that's happening in Virginia based on the elections and the legalization happening in Virginia. And the Republicans are saying, yeah, this ship has sailed and we need to get in front of this and actually accelerate the timeline for legalization in Virginia. So that's a good indicator there that it is something that, they're motivated to see a framework around in some way, shape, or form. And on the social equity piece, it sounds like to Mace's bill, it's about expunging records or getting people out of prison at the federal level. And I think that's where, people in Virginia that are pushing for social equity are now aiming for, right? We just need to get people out of prison. And this is something that I think Ben Kovler was quoted on during earnings about. This is just crazy that these people are in prison. So it is, a big part of it. And I think a pretty good win, even from this side or the Republican side. So I think that, signals like Virginia kind of show that there's some momentum here from the Republicans, in addition to the Democrats.
Yeah, and I think you can't look at this along party lines anymore. And we all need to be really proud of this because the work everyone in this industry has done. This is no longer a Republican or a Democrat initiative. This is now an initiative of DC establishment is awake and eyes wide open. When I started, it was very hard to get attention outside of the caucus from the Western progressive states that already had cannabis in play. This is now a real issue. This is something Republicans want, libertarian side of the Republican Party is like, look, states' rights, people want to do it. The, moderate Democrats, same thing. The liberal Democrats want even more. They want the whole kitchen sink, and so do I. It's just going to take a second. But I think I couldn't be prouder where as an industry we've come in. I had this pegged as like a 7 or 8 year project. To be here in 4.5 to 5 years is incredible.
It really is. And I get really excited when I hear that representatives from places, like the concept of strange bedfellows, we talk about it all the time, but what that tells me is, we see the broad level polling data, right? But we know these people are running tight polling data regarding their jurisdictions to understand. And so what that is telling me is if they're waking up and they're actually outwardly speaking about this or like addressing this, then the data has got to be there that's driving them in that direction. Because that's not something you just wake up and you're like, oh, I'm taking an interest in this. No. And so it does. It means this is all working. And I think that, and the child shall lead them. Like we're all thinking them there. So it's good to see that. And I think that this is real progress. And it's definitely the hard work of the people. Like when I was on the board of the Marijuana Policy Project, to your point, there were a couple of libertarians on there and they were like, look, we're just in the interest of people having the rights to have access to things. They weren't like, I'm dying on the sword of cannabis, but we're dying on the sword of that people should have rights to it and people shouldn't go to prison for it. And the people who are in prison should get out for it. And so that I thought was a really great mission. It's kind of nice to see.
It really is. And look, big kudos to Ben. Ben's a good friend and I'm stoked to know him and hear him say that because, those comments I think are really important. This criminal justice aspect of what we deal with 100% needs to change. I wish we could wave a magic wand and do it, but any incremental gains there. But there's way too many people that, there's family friends. Obviously my dad, was one of those affected folks and a lot of family friends as well. It sucks. And I couldn't imagine having that scarlet letter on me or sitting in prison. Cases, some people still sitting in prison while they could get on a prison computer and see weed maps and they could buy weed down the street. It would be maddening. So I get it. And I think as an industry, more people need to speak out like Ben did, and more people need to be not just cutting checks to organizations and doing a press conference. Be willing to get out in front of it. And, cannabis industry it's been around a lot longer than public companies. Be authentic and stand up and say that. Big kudos to him for doing that.
Couldn't agree more. It was really impressive. He used every opportunity this past week to stand up and say, yeah, we did a great job, but we also have to correct this. So I was really
Has to be done.
Yeah.
I was proud of him. I definitely sent him a few texts for sure.
Yeah.
Proud of him.
Very, very proud.
To recap for anyone listening, look at the next, call it 3 weeks or big weeks. So next, the balance of this week, they'll probably get a version of the NDAA approved in the Senate again. If the SAFE Amendment doesn't get in there, that's not the end all be all. Don't sell your pot stocks and buy Bitcoin just yet. Hold tight. There'll be a moment. The Thanksgiving, thankfully, the trading's limited. Thank God. And then I think you'll see that following week in the conference process is when the House and Senate negotiators come together. That is where our opportunity, and that's the best shot on goal, by the way, we've had as an industry ever at achieving a federal win, will be that last week of November, first week of December. That's the best shot on goal we've ever had. And there's tremendous amount of work has gone in by a tremendous amount of people well before my time and with me, and a ton of people working their butts off to get us this shot of goal. This is coming. And then you'll see it get debated back and forth. And I truly believe by the end of the year, you're going to see SAFE passed in the NDAA. And then the real fun starts as we keep moving Nancy Mace's bill forward. And then also simultaneously is when the negotiations will hopefully start on, taking parts of the Democratic bill and parts of the Republican bill and hopefully finding what they used to be able to do in DC pretty well, finding a compromise. We'll see if everyone can find a compromise before the midterm. So exciting time to be in cannabis, maddening, sure. But that's why we grow a weed that we can use to not jump off buildings from watching the cannabis markets. And I think it's an opportunity to be, we're on the front row of history here. So enjoy the ride.
Well, Brady, thank you so much for your insight here. And let's hope those bets you made do come up your way here and we see some progress before the end of the year. And speaking of the end of the year, we're going to have you back before the end of the year to recap 2021, look at some predictions for 2022, and kind of maybe we'll catch up. Maybe it'll be some celebration might be happening post-SAFE passing. We'll see. So stay tuned for that. We'll see y'all next time.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.